most environmentalists, and I have friends who still work for Maine Audubon, work for the Natural Resources Council of Maine, these people are in love with wind power.
That's why I said everybody I've ever known that was concerned about the environment fell in love with wind power. And I would say, based on what you've described, there's a seduction about it.
Correct. Absolutely. But the problem is that most of these people actually don't make money in the private sector, or does their money come from the private sector? So they really don't, they have a completely disconnect from reality of economics and what in the conditions that most people live and work in on a daily basis.
I would think if someone said to me, Kim, I want you to know wind power is really, on a whole systems level, inefficient. If I didn't hear what you just said, and if it couldn't be verified, I would say that's bunk. You know what I'm saying? Because I've been told to accept that wind power is an energy saver, that it can make us energy independent, that it's inexpensive. You know what I'm saying? All these things that are associated with the sell on it. So,
right. Well, going back to what I was talking about earlier about these studies that have been done by Spain, Denmark, and Germany. These studies were just done in the last year, so they're all very recent studies, and they look back over the last 30, 40 years, 10 years of experience for these countries. And you just go and Google Danish wind power experience, and you'll eventually come to it, or Spain or Germany. These studies are out there on the internet. Going back to that problem that you're talking about, these are all interconnected, and what they've done in our minds is create this image by using several fears that wind power is the solution to. The fear is, of course, that we're going to run out of hydrocarbons and wind will provide an unlimited source of power. The fear is that we're going to keep sending our money overseas to foreign countries that hate us, and wind power will allow us to harness our own energy and we'll be independent.
You spoke in our first conversation about this concern for deep-level corruption. What do you mean? Okay,
in the state of Maine specifically, First Wind is the company that's driving most of these energy
right, you shared that part.
Now, First Wind is development director, a guy named Kurt Adams. He was formerly John Baldacci, who's currently governor, his chief counsel, his lawyer. He became also, while Baldacci he's still governor until the end of this year. He became governor in 2002. Baldacci appointed him as the head of what we call the Public Utilities Commission, or PUC, in the state. While there, he basically caused the local small utilities to divest themselves and break themselves up into parts that, basically production on one side and transmission on the other. So he was instrumental in making sure this split up occurred. And also, then after putting into what we call renewable production standards for the state of Maine.
And what does that mean?
Renewable production standards basically calls for new energy sources that are alternative or renewable energy sources. In other words, in the state of Maine, there's only two you can choose from.
Does it have to be approved of?
Yes, wind power or what's known as tidal power. Okay.
And what is tidal power?
Tidal power is they put these big propellers under the water where the tide flow is pretty strong. As you probably know, Bay of Fundy is one of the biggest strong tidal flows in the Atlantic. So they put these big propellers underwater, and they turn when the tide goes in and out, and then that turning is connected to a turbine, which produces electricity. So it's like using water to turn propellers, which makes electricity. So Kurt Adams put into these rules that we had to get to a renewable energy production standard of 40, well, it started out at 30%, now it's 40%, from these alternative sources only. Not hydroelectric, which is also on a federal level known as a renewable energy source, hydroelectric being, dams and rivers, or what's known as cogeneration, which is a combination of using oil or natural gas plus biomass, which is trash or trees, and then biomass, which is just burning wood. Now, we in Maine, 42% of our power comes from hydroelectric, biomass, and cogeneration already. About 52% is natural gas, and 8% is bought power from other sources. So we don't have really a renewable energy problem, but Kurt Adams put this in place. Then he jumped ship to First Wind a month later and became their director of production, and since then, he was also in Maine, went to the next step, which is we did this whole study on where to expedite the permitting process to site and make sure these things were put up around the state. Now, there are sites all over the state right now, something like in the order of 15 that are under permitting or under construction or in service. And each one of these sites takes approximately, well, the estimates range between 25 and 50,000 acres will be clear-cut and destroyed in the state of Maine on the mountaintops.
Why?
Well, every one of these towers you put up takes anywhere from 3 to 8 acres. They have to clear-cut and level it, is gone. Woodlands, boop, gone. And they cut out the mountainside because these blades have to turn without interference. And they have to be flat in order to level the machines that are on top of these, anywhere from 150 to 250-foot towers. The blades themselves are 150 to 225 feet long. So anyway, they have to clear cut and destroy land, and they have to be at least 1,500 feet apart. So, you do the math. You have to. The roads have to be wide enough to allow a tractor trailer on a 2-lane highway. Basically, it's about 25 to 50,000 acres.
That's terrible.
Absolutely.
That's painful to hear. Now,
every year, according to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, somewhere between 20 and 40 birds are killed by each turbine. In Spain's experience, they in a 10-year period killed 3 million migratory birds.
Are you serious?
Serious. And on a yearly basis, there's something in the order of 1,200 hawks and eagles are killed by turbines in Spain.
So who's the real environmentalist? You are.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So Kurt Adams is now the head of. He was the head of the PUC. He's now head of First Wind, and it's been not only.
So first, wait a minute. First, a person creates the policy.
Creates the policy.
Then runs over to the corporate end.
Correct, to get the money from the policy he created.
Aren't you concerned for your life over there?
Oh, tell you what. I've been talking about this for 3 years now, and people are just finally waking up to it. And unfortunately, it may be too late. Okay, so here's the next step. Okay, remember that Kurt Adams went so far as to make Central Maine Power, which was the local utility, split into 2 parts: production and transmission. The transmission was bought by, or is owned now by, a company called FPL, which is owned by a company called Energy East, which is owned by a Spanish company named Iberdrola. Recently, Governor Baldacci went on a trip to visit the wind turbines in Spain and Denmark. It was all a gag when he came back and said, well, we should put these companies back together, put the production and the transmission together. And that's where the transmission line problem comes back into play, because the transmission lines in Maine cannot accommodate the variation of power surges that would be put into place because of the wind turbines. So we have to reconstruct our entire grid system to accommodate wind, which would cost somewhere between $8 and $10 billion. And the cost of putting up these wind turbines just on the land itself is about $2 billion. Adding that to the cost of electricity in our rate system will drive up our cost from 15 to maybe 24, 25 cents a kilowatt.
So where's the efficiency? Where's the independence? Where's the saving the environment?
Yeah, good question. Done. Period.
This is painful to hear.
Wind is not the solution to our energy problem. It's not the solution to lowering the cost and getting United States, Maine specifically, or United States more efficient, and therefore more competitive and economically viable. And wind is not going to reduce our CO2, even if you think that's a problem in the first place. And it will not help the environment because it's destroying it, putting up these wind farms. It's the wrong solution, period. Never mind that. The way they pay for it is through deficit financing, adding more to our debt, which creates less independence because the Chinese are buying our debt.
Talk about deficit financing and aggregate demand, please.
Okay, aggregate demand. Economic concept is that how do you figure out what the consumer... They talk about it on TV as, but we got to increase consumer demand.
Right.
So aggregate demand is how much money the consumers are spending in order to drive business. So if you break it down into its component parts, there are really 3 parts to aggregate demand. One is income, in other words, your job, or income from investments and other sources like that. The other is savings. You can take money out of the savings you had previously and spend that. That's demand. That'll help demand. And the third is borrowing, and that is when you loosen up underwriting standards like we had from 2002 to 2007, it increases the amount of people can borrow, and therefore that increases